now, oh God, we turn to hear a word from you. For Lord, without you, I'm overwhelmed at the thought of preaching. Without you, I'm inadequate to deliver something of value to news that is priceless. So God, I ask that you be ever so gracious unto me. Allow a ray of your light to penetrate the darkness of my understanding. Grant confidence and clarity that utterance may be given unto me, that I might open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, that your people will be edified, your name glorified. Amen. I want to invite your attention to Hebrews, the 12th chapter. Hebrews, the 12th chapter, very familiar verse. Verse 1 and 2, Hebrews, the 12th chapter, 1 and 2 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." And won't you help me title this sermon? Look at your neighbor and say, "Neighbor, you can stay in the race." You can stay in the race. I must admit, this is not the sermon that I thought I was going to preach today. I must admit that all week I've been planning a new series, and I thought we were going to start the series today, but God kind of just laid this on my heart over the last few days. And I must admit, I think part of it was connected to saying goodnight to Deaconess Gatewood. I think part of it was saying goodnight to Deaconess Gatewood, who on yesterday we said goodnight to her after she lived 88 years. All week I've been hearing the stories of Deaconess Gatewood's impact on women in particular in this church. And all week I've been hearing the stories of how Deaconess Gatewood, and not just Deaconess Gatewood, but how other persons who've been a part of this church for years have encouraged so many people's lifestyles. All week, I will admit, Deaconess Gwen Bailey has been on my mind all week, because when I first came to this church, Deaconess Bailey told me about the impact that Deaconess Gatewood had on her. And about how there were times when it was Deaconess Gatewood who encouraged her to keep pushing. It was hearing the stories from Faye Coleman. It was hearing the stories from Deaconess Margaret Faison and Nell, who were helping me to understand that this thing called life is a race that we all gotta run. And the truth of the matter is, I will be honest with you, I've been struggling with how it seems as though after the pandemic, it seems as though there are more people who have a level of apathy than ever before. More people seem to not care more than before. More people are willing to throw in the towel than before. You know, I work in HR, and this past few years has been known as the Great Resignation. How many people have been willing to just quit a job? And I'm not convinced everybody's quitting a job to go start the bakery. I'm not convinced everybody's supposed to be baking cookies. I'm not convinced that everybody's going to buy your T-shirts. I'm not convinced that everybody's supposed to just jump out of a thing. And then I've been looking at how in the church, how many people are willing to just say, all right, I'm done. How many people are willing to say that I don't have time for ministry, that I don't have time for that anymore? How many people are willing to not be a part of a church these days? How many people are willing, and I'm not hating on you. Thank you for watching online. Thank you. Please keep watching online. But I'm not convinced that everybody has turned their living room into a sanctuary. I'm not convinced that everybody is doing their own Bible study. Can I push it? Can I push it? But before the pandemic, we had about 30 folk in Bible study. Now I'm lucky if I see 2. And I'm not convinced y'all watching online the way you claim you're watching online. But I'm wrestling with how easy it is, or how easy it seems that people are willing to just jump out of a thing, give up on a thing, not move forward on a thing, and just decide, I've done all that I'm going to do in this moment. But I'm going to push it even further. I have a friend who often says that sometimes people have decided that's enough, God, for me. Sometimes people decided, I don't want to go but so deep. It may be a subconscious decision where you say, this is a level that I'm comfortable with, because this is a level where, I do enough to be able to say I know God and I serve God, but I ain't looking to really go too deep in God, because going too deep in God means I got to change my lifestyle. Going too deep in God means I got to switch this up. There's some folk who reach a level and say, that's enough for me. And I submit to you that is not what God has called us to. I submit to you that the moment you stop progressing, the moment you stand still, you have found yourself outside of the will of God. God is a God who is always looking to progress. God is a God who's not looking to keep anyone stagnant. God says every day you ought to experience something new about me. And the more you experience about me, the more your eyes will be open to you. And the more your eyes will be open to you, the more you can develop, the more you can grow. There are levels to this thing called life that you have not reached yet, because you have not reached a level in him. I'm going to say it again. There are levels to this thing called life that you have not reached and will not reach until you're willing to invite him to that level. Every now and then you ought to be asking God, Lord, have I seen enough of you to go to that space that I've been asking for? You're asking God to open a door, and God's saying, I'm not willing to open that door because you have not opened your door to me. You're asking God to show you the next thing, and God's like, well, let's deal with the now thing and in me. Every now and then you ought to be asking God, Lord, what is it that you want me to see? What is it that you want me to do? Where is it that you want me to go? God, I need you. If I'm going to run this race, God, I need you to set the course. If I'm going to run this race, I need to understand that some of my stamina, some of my energy, some of how far I go is connected to how much of myself I've given him. The writer says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us. Some of your text says, let us throw aside every weight and sin that so easily entangles us. Y'all thought August Alsina came up with entangles. It's in the book. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scanning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. What the writer is doing is giving us a picture that should help us run our race. He's literally giving us a picture in order for us to think about what this journey in life really looks like. Well, there's a couple of things that come up for me that I want to bring out to you to help you stay in your race. The first thing that comes up for me is this: you can stay in your race when you realize you're not the first to run it. It's in the text. It's in the text. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great crowd of witnesses, part of what the imagery is trying to create for you is this notion of running a race in a stadium and having people in the crowd. There are people in the stands who are rooting for you. There are people in the stands who are pushing for you. There are people in the stands who your race ought to be making proud. And these people in the stands are people who have already run the race that they have ran. In other words, what I need you to realize is, yes, you have a specific call, and yes, you have a specific purpose, but I need you to realize that this thing ain't just about you, and that this thing is bigger than you. And even, yes, your purpose, even, yes, your call, you ain't the first one with it, which means every now and then you need to grab hold of some folk when you feel like throwing in the towel, when you feel like giving up, when you feel like quitting. You need to remember some of the folk who have gone before you that didn't throw in the towel. You need to remember some of the folk that have gone before you that ran their race. I know you need some biblical heroes. You need to remember how Noah kept going when folk ain't never seen rain and folk was laughing at him, how Noah kept pushing, doing what God has called him to do. You got to remember how Moses kept going, even though when God called him, he told God, I got a stuttering problem. I can't speak. How are you going to use me to call your people? You need to remember how Daniel went into the lion's den. You need to remember how Saul was changed into Paul. You need to remember how Peter was called while his mother-in-law was homesick. You need to remember some of your biblical heroes, but maybe the biblical heroes don't do it for you. Maybe you need to remember some of the world's heroes. You need to remember how black people struggled to get you to your freedom. You need to remember how Dr. Martin Luther King spoke with eloquence. You need to remember how Malcolm X spoke with eloquence. You need to remember how people paved the way for you. You need to remember that doors were open for you. You need to remember how Frederick Douglass was used to get you your freedom. You need to remember that there are people who came in front of you. Maybe I went too far back for you. You need to remember some of the heroes in your own life. You need to remember how Doris Carpenter pulled for you. You need to remember how your grandmother pulled for you. You need to remember how your mama prayed for you. You need to remember how there were folk. You need to remember that coach that kept pushing you. You need to remember that teacher who didn't accept less from you. You need to remember that big brother who really ain't even related to you, but still took time to make sure you didn't get on the street. Maybe that didn't do it for you. Let me call out some of your folk up in here. You need to remember Deacon Atkins, and you need to remember Deacon Bishop, and you need to remember Leon Lewis, and you need to remember Eddie Tate, and you need to remember some of the folk that came before you. You need to remember Margaret Faison. You need to remember some folk who have done this thing already. Well, maybe that didn't do it for you. You need to remember that there's always somebody in your life who is pushing for you, who is pulling for you. Everybody ain't against you. There's some folk who's rooting for you. There's some folk who are wanting you to win. You ain't the first to run it. And since you ain't the first to run it, you ought not ever get arrogant about the race. Since you ain't the first to run it, you ought to remember that there's some folk pulling for me. There's some folk pushing for me. There's some folk who need me to stay in this race. I want you to realize that you ain't the first to run it. But then I want you to realize if you're going to stay in the race, you've got to drop the weight. I know. It's in the text. I ain't talking about our physical weight. Yep, some of us got to drop that too. But that ain't necessarily what the text is talking about. The text says that let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. Again, some of your texts say, let us throw off every weight and sin. It's interesting that the writer chose to separate weight and sin. Because the writer wants to be clear. You know, if I were to stand up here and start talking about sin, y'all would shout for it. Some of y'all would be shouting because you genuinely remember your stuff. But can I be real? Some of you would be shouting to try to hide the fact that it's still your stuff. You know, one of the commitments that I've made as pastor, you don't see me stand up here a lot talking about what's wrong with you. You don't see me stand up here a lot talking about the sin in your life that you got to throw in. Because if I start listing the sin, I'm going to teach you a secret about us as pastors. If I start listing the sin, most of us will make one of two mistakes. Because of our ability to communicate and the fact that most of us are talk to thinkers, what I mean, most of us talk as we're thinking, we would start giving our sin to you. You listen to a pastor preach enough, and you can hear what his issue is if you ain't careful. If every time I come up in here talking about put the money back, it probably mean I'm the one stealing it. If every time I come up in here talking about keep your eyes fixed on the Lord, it probably means I'm having a hard time during offering. I might expose myself if I talk too much, but can I tell you what the other problem is? I might be acutely aware of that, and I might leave my sin off the list. At the end of the day, I don't spend a whole lot of time digging in on sin, because what I've come to find out is that sin is sin. And what I've come to find out is that in God's eyes, it's the same. What I've come to find out is that in God's eyes, he's not balancing this thing. He's saying whatever's blocking you from me, whatever's keeping you from me, whatever is distracting you from my will in your life, that is sin. But can I really go in on you? For some of us, the problem isn't the sins of our life. For some of us, the problems are the weight in our lives. What are the weights in our lives? The things that we are allowing to keep us grounded. The things that we are allowing to slow down our progression. The things that we are allowing to stop us from getting to the next level. For some of us, the weight in our life is relationships. Some of us let the wrong people in the wrong spaces. Some of us let the wrong voice get too loud in our ear. Some of us take too much advice from Facebook. Some of us take too much advice from Instagram. Some of us are too into the relationship that we don't hear God. For some of us, it's not the relationship. For some of us, it's you. Your own self-doubt. Your own questioning everything about you. Your own questioning if you're worthy, if God can do it in your life, if God's going to move in your life. You've got so caught up in your own background that you think you're not worthy of something more. You've got so caught up in what you've done that you think you can't get to next levels. For some of us, it ain't church folk throwing what you did in your face. It's you throwing what you did in your face. It's you constantly reminding yourself of what you've done wrong. You haven't forgiven yourself for your own issues. For some of us, the weight is relationship. For some of us, the weight is ourselves. And for some of us, the weight is distractions. Social media has become too important for you. You fooled yourself into believing that the life you post on Instagram is real life. You fooled yourself into believing that the life you post on TikTok is real life. You fooled yourself into believing, because I done seen a lot of your posts. Ain't nobody posting their struggle. Ain't nobody posting vacations as if that's what you do all day, every day, knowing this first time you have been on plane. You posting lobster dinners like we don't know you ate oodles and noodles the other night. Why all your food got to be pictured? You're so distracted into this life or this facade that we're creating that we're missing out on real life. For some of us, the distractions are relationships. For some of us, the distractions are social media. For some, the distractions are ourselves. But can I really push it? I'm about to really get in trouble. Live. For some of us, the distraction is success. Every new opportunity is actually a weight on you. The promotion that you thought was a new door is really just pulling you down from where God has called you. The job that you thought was the best opportunity really is just draining you. The business that you want to run, that you want to start, because you jumped out there without asking God. You don't have the resources for it. You don't have the moments for it. Here's the deal. When God calls you to a thing, he will provide for the thing. I'm not suggesting that you don't succeed, that you don't push, but I am suggesting that you take time and ask God, show me the things that are from you and show me the things that are just grounding me, the things that are just holding me back, the things that are just pulling me down. If you really want to stay in the race, I want you to realize that you ain't the first to run it. If you really want to stay in the race, I want you to drop the weight. Ask God to make clear to you, what are the things that are not allowing me to go to the level you've called me to go? What are the things, whether good or bad, that I keep holding on to? Look over your life and think about how many things God has allowed to die that you keep reviving. The relationships that God allowed to end that you keep pulling back in. The opportunities that God denied that you keep pushing for. Maybe it's time to ask God, reveal to me, is this from you or is this me adding weight to the table? I want you to realize you ain't the first to run it. I want you to realize that you need to drop the rate, but I also want you to realize the type of race you're in. It's interesting how the writer describes this race. He says, and let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. When you listen to the context clues, he's actually giving you some clues about this type of race. Most of us, when we think about a race, we think about a sprint. We think about being the first one to finish. We think about it in the form of competition where you're racing against somebody and you're trying to stay in first place. That's not necessarily what's being described here. What's being described here is not a sprint, not how fast you can do it. How do I know? Because the writer uses the word endurance. The writer uses a word that connects to stamina. In other words, it ain't about going fast. It's about going right. It ain't about beating the person next to you. It's about beating yourself. It's about being better than you were yesterday. It's about progressing in your walk with God. I'm sad to see how many folk are running, trying to catch up to people that you ain't even supposed to be in the race with. How many times you're running trying to beat somebody else instead of asking God, is this the race for me? In other words, you've got to get to the place where you understand that some of us lose or jump out of the race because we don't have the stamina to keep up. So we keep looking for the next thing. We keep dumping out. You move too fast in this thing. When God's saying, look, keep a steady pace. In this thing called life, this thing is about keeping a steady pace. This thing is about realizing that there's going to be some stuff that try to knock you off your square. There's going to be some stuff that try to pull you out, but your job is to just keep pushing. Your job is to just keep running, because if you ever keep a steady pace, that's how you can get endurance. That's how you can go further. That's how you can go where God is calling you to be. Well, how do I get endurance? At the end of the day, I said it last week, maybe I ought to start praying, Lord, give me the strength to endure. Give me the strength to keep going. Give me the strength to not dump out of this thing. Give me the strength to not quit. I know it gets hard sometimes, and I know it's not working sometimes, and I know it's easier to just go sit down on the bench sometimes, but I absolutely believe that if you, God, would just give me the strength to endure, I can keep pushing no matter what comes my way. I can keep pushing no matter who tries to knock me off. I can keep pushing. And here's the real shout: if you have the strength to endure, it means that you'll find that you'll reach levels and you'll reach points where you're going to get some glory because of your endurance. In other words, you may dump out of a race before you've reached the checkpoint. You may dump out of the race before you've reached a breaking point. I need some folk who stay in it, because there's levels to this thing where stuff is going to break off in my life. I need some folk who's willing to stay in it, because I realize that as long as I'm in the race, it means that I'm doing my duty. It means that I'm doing my part. I need some folk who realize that this ain't a sprint. You need some endurance, but then there's another clue in the text that ought to make you shout. It says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked for us. Yeah. That should have made you do shouts. That should have made you do backflips, because it says, let us run with endurance the race marked for us. I'm going to try it again. The text says, let us run with endurance the race marked for us, which means if I'm in it and if God called me to it, it means that the course is specifically designed for me to succeed. The course is specifically designed for me. Since this race is designed for me, I don't give a darn what comes at me. I don't give a darn what tries to take me out, because the race I'm in is specifically designed for me. So since it's specifically designed for me, there ain't a thing that can pull me out of it. There ain't a thing that can win over me. There ain't a thing that can take me out. This course is marked for me. Oh, I'm trying to give you a moment to shout. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I know there's some ups and I know there's some downs, but these ups were designed for me and these downs were designed for me, which means I'm going to be better for staying in the race. I need you to realize the race you in was patterned for you. God looked down and decided that he needed a you, but not only did he decide that he needed a you, he decided that a way needed to be made for you. So he knew everything that would beset you. He knew everything that would try to distract you. He knew everything that's wrong with you, and he designed the course so that you can navigate through even the hardest moments, so that you can navigate through even the most distractious moments. Is there anybody here that knows this race was designed for me? Well, I know why you're not shouting. You're not shouting because you think I'm not talking to you. I really don't care what's in your background. I really don't care what you've done wrong. I really don't care what sin is on the table. Yes, even you have a race that is designed for you. That's a shout right there. Really don't care if you think you canceled yourself out. Really don't care if you think you can't do it. While people may have counted you out, God knew everything that was wrong with you when he designed the course for you. How do I know? Because Jeremiah says, while I was yet in the belly of my mother's womb, God knew me. God ordained something for me, which means before I even had a chance to do wrong, God had already designed the course for me. How do I know? Because we've got a God who lives outside of time, which means he sees what's going to happen before it ever happened. Yep, God knew you was going to trip over that. That's why he sent somebody that at the moment of your trip could pick you up. That's why he sent somebody that when you got tired could pull you a little further. This race was designed for you. Well, I know I'm supposed to only have 3 points, but I got one more. You can stay in this race when you realize who's in it with you. It's in the text. It says, fixing your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. It's in the text. What the text is tailored to teach is that, yes, I'm in this race, and this race is specifically designed for me. And yes, I've got to keep pushing, but I can keep pushing when I fix my eyes on the one who's running with me. I'm trying to help you get to it. If you ever get to the place where you fix your eyes on Jesus, that's where you get your endurance. Can I really push it? What I'm trying to argue is that when your eyes are fixed on Jesus, it will create worship in your life. It will create a presence in your life where you realize some of your endurance and some of your getting to your next level is connected to your ability to worship him and your ability to keep your eyes on him. Oh, I know what the problem is. Some of us have not thought about how amazing the opportunity to worship him really is. Can I push it? Lord, drop this in my spirit this morning, and I want to give it to you. When you look in the Bible, there are at least 3 angels that God gave specific assignments to. There are at least 3 angels that God gave specific assignments to. You know one of them to be Gabriel. Gabriel, whenever you see in the Bible, God gave him the specific assignment of delivering messages. You saw Gabriel deliver a message to Joseph and to Mary about Jesus. You saw Gabriel deliver the message about John the Baptist being born. You saw Gabriel delivering the message to Daniel. Gabriel was the angel that God would use whenever a message needed to be delivered. Another one that is often mentioned is Michael. You saw Michael as the angel that God would use to fight his wars, to fight his battles. You see it one time in Jude, where Jude describes Michael fighting with the enemy over the body of Moses. And you see it a lot in Revelations, where he's described as the archangel who will come. The third one that we don't talk a lot about is Lucifer. He was the angel that was assigned to create a space of worship. He was the angel that was created to create a worship space for God. Now, Michael is still doing his job, because remember, the Bible says that he's going to have some work to do in the apocalyptic time. And we can assume that Gabriel is still doing his job, because people still get messages and people still get words. But Lucifer was an angel who was fired from his job. He was fired from his job because he could not create a space of worship for God. He spent more time trying to create worship for himself. So he was fired from the position and he was thrown out of heaven, which means there was a vacancy on God's team. It is interesting to me. You don't see God fill that vacancy, but what you do see is Jesus say over in John is that the Father is seeking people to worship him, which means at the end of the day, the vacancy can be filled by you and your worship, which means here's the real shout. You've got an opportunity to be on God's team, and all it takes is for you to worship him. Worship him in spirit. Worship him in truth. Worship him. And I'm trying to help you. If you ever realize that you're on God's team, he'll join building your team so that you can push to new levels, push to new opportunities, push to the next place. Is there anybody here that's willing to stay in the race? Is there anybody here that's willing to do their part? Well, how do I worship him? Remind yourself that he prayed in a garden till sweating like drops of blood came down from his head. Remind yourself that he was tried in an unjust court, never said a mumbling word. Remind yourself that he was beaten and bruised for you. Remind yourself that he died for you. But remind yourself that early Sunday morning, he got up with all power in his hands. Well, if that didn't do it for you, let me translate it for you. All I just said is he loves you so much that he keeps revealing himself to you. All I said is that he loves you so much that he's giving you opportunities to run your race. He loves you so much that he's going to be in the race with you. So look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, stay in your race. Stay in your race. Stay in your race.